Could this be Jim Harbaugh's best recruiting class at Michigan yet? And if it is, how is he pulling this off given the lack of success he's had when it comes to winning championships in Ann Arbor? We'll discuss next on the season premiere of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace, and it is almost here. It is therefore time for the season premiere episode of another season of Michigan Podcast. Thank you to all of you for joining us again this season and for being a part of what we've done the last couple of years. And now we're over 10,000 subscribers here on our YouTube page. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you as well, listening on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play as well. We're going to put the focus here in our premiere episode on what's really been the only big story involving college athletics other than the virus, and that is recruiting. We're seeing hundreds more, literally 600 more kids have committed in the class of 2021 compared to how many had committed at this juncture last year. Even though you can't take visits, it's a dead period for in-person recruiting. Still, the Zoom calls are adding even more of a personal touch, and it has certainly benefited Michigan. Now, whenever you talk Michigan, you can't avoid bringing up the context of Ohio State, and there's no question they're having what could go down as a historically great recruiting class. But Michigan, at least as far as it's been under Jim Harbaugh, could be doing the same. This could turn out to be Jim Harbaugh's best recruiting class in Ann Arbor yet. Here's some highlights of what we know from the commitments Michigan has garnered so far. Michigan's class is currently ranked number 5 by 24/7 Sports and number 4 by Rivals. Of course, Ohio State is number 1 in both of those services, but if you're number 5 and number 4, that doesn't suck. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Next point on Michigan's football recruiting class. Michigan already has as many top 100 commits as Clemson does and still has the potential to add as many as 4 more. Names like Drew Kendall, Rayshawn Benny, Donovan Edwards, just to name a few, Rocco Spindler. Those are all players that Michigan is at worst in the top 2 for as we speak right now. And if you were to add those 4 top 100 kids to the 3 Michigan already has, that would be approaching an all-time record of top 100 commitments that Michigan's ever had in the history of the recruiting service era. Next, Michigan has the consensus number 2 class in the Big Ten, and what's a strong cycle so far for Big Ten recruiting overall. Right now, you've got Iowa, Wisconsin are ranked with consensus top 15, top 25 classes. We mentioned Ohio State, the consensus number 1 class in the country. You look at Penn State putting together another really good top 15 class. Rutgers has a top 40 class going right now. Maryland has a top 15 class going right now. So this is a banner year for Big Ten recruiting, and still Michigan has the consensus solid number 2 class in the league. Michigan already has a 5-star quarterback committed in J.J. McCarthy. That's the linchpin in any recruiting class. And he will be the starter under center for IMG Academy this fall. So you will get a really good look at him. And that really is the key to pulling off any kind of an elite class. Do you have the linchpin elite quarterback prospect? And in J.J. McCarthy from the state of Illinois, Michigan already has theirs. And he's already recruiting for the Wolverines. And if there's any place where you can find more talent, and Michigan has already found some talent there, it is certainly IMG Academy. Next, if you close, let's play a hypothetical out. Let's say Michigan closes this class with Quentin Somerville, a defensive end out of Arizona, George Rooks, a defensive lineman out of New Jersey, Rocco Spindler, considered one of the top guards in the country from the state of Michigan, Drew Kendall, probably the best offensive tackle on the East Coast this year, Donovan Edwards, one of the top 2 or 3 running back prospects in the country from the state of Michigan, Christian Dixon, a consensus top 250 overall wide receiver out of California, and Rayshawn Benny, who can play offensive or defensive line and is a top 100 prospect in the country out of the Detroit area. If Michigan finishes with that class, and right now the Wolverines are at worst in the top 2 for each of those prospects at the moment, that would give Michigan in the 24/7 class calculator. I love how they do that, by the way. You can go in there and find recruits you think your school can get, punch them into a virtual recruiting class, and hey, if we landed these guys, what would our score be? Well, if Michigan were to land those 6 players, and it's very realistic that they could, Michigan would end up with a final class score of 277.68. To put that into perspective, and you compare it to Michigan's 2019 class, that was the number 1 overall class in the Big Ten. If you were to compare those 2 classes, that would be a higher class score than that 2019 class, which, as I just said a moment ago, was the number 1 class in the Big Ten. But that class also had 26 commits, 3 more than the potential closing class for 2021 that I just listed. So even with 3 fewer players, this class would score better than what was the number 1 class in the Big Ten back in 2019. So who are some of the top players that Michigan already has in the fold? And what's kind of been the secret sauce here for the Wolverines pulling this off despite the unmet expectations on the gridiron in the fall? Eric Rutter is our new recruiting reporter at Wolverine Digest. He's been following this all recruiting season long, and he's going to join us here next on Michigan Podcast. Want to thank all of you who have been supporting us on Patreon these last few years here on Michigan Podcast. And for those of you that ask us every now and then, hey, what can we do to help support what you guys are doing and help it to grow? Well, supporting us on Patreon is a big way you can do that. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And as you can see, when you become a $5 a month subscriber and supporter or more, you get as well exclusive content that we publish just for you on our Patreon page, including a lot of the stuff that I do with sports handicapping as legalization goes wider throughout the country. In fact, you can see I put up just a couple of weeks ago the notes for NFL win totals, looking at the schedule release. So a lot more where that came from if you want to support us at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here on our season premiere episode of Michigan Podcast, and he's our latest edition at Wolverine Digest. Eric Rutter is here. He's been covering this surprising Michigan football recruiting class that Jim Harbaugh and staff have been putting together. Eric, welcome to Michigan Podcast. It's good to have you with us. You've been doing great work so far at Wolverine Digest. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hey, Steve. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on here today.
So, Eric, let's start with the big picture question that I raised a minute ago before you came on. In fact, since we put this show together, Michigan's added another commitment, Tristan Bounds, the offensive tackle out of the East Coast, and now one of the services, I think it's Rivals, has Michigan's class number 3 in the country right now. At the time we were putting this week's premiere episode together, they were number 4 and number 5. So the class is ranked even higher now, and yet, as Michigan fans, we are all aware of how these seasons under Harbaugh have ended. They've lost at least 3 games every year. They haven't won any championships. They're Barrett Sallee and Clickbait Nation's favorite team to dunk on, right? And yet they're putting together right now what pound for pound could be his best recruiting class. What's the secret sauce? As you've talked to some of these players, is there a common theme that is it all the guys are still getting drafted in the NFL? Is it that they're getting even more access to Jim Harbaugh than they typically would because he can't go anywhere, so he's talking to all these guys more? What's been the secret sauce here?
Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted issue. As you mentioned, a lot of these prospects were watching the NFL draft in late April because there simply wasn't a lot of sports going on. And they certainly took notice of the success that Michigan had getting guys ready and prepared for the next level. Apart from the 10 Wolverines that were drafted, I think 2 or 3 different Michigan players signed as undrafted free agents shortly thereafter. So the graduating class and guys that exhausted their eligibility or went early, like in the case of Cesar Ruiz, that definitely made an impact on a lot of kids. And you heard that from their reactions in terms of why they picked Michigan.
Go ahead, finish your answer. I'm sorry.
Kind of along that same note, the whole coronavirus quarantine has put everyone in a wait-and-see position. A lot of these kids don't have the opportunity now to go to these summer camps to work out in front of the coaches that they might be interested in for those schools. And the fall football season is in jeopardy for some kids as well. So having that uncertainty, I think a lot of kids are jumping on board because if they've been to Michigan already, it's a familiar location. That was a big thing for the edge rushing Viper commit, Keyshawn Bennett, from last week as well. He mentioned that was a big factor in his recruitment too. So being unable to forecast what coaches they'll really be able to see over the summer and in the fall, I think that's helped Michigan reel in the top 5 class that they have at the moment right now.
In some strange way, do you think this historic start that Ohio State is off to with its class, it's possible they could end up with the top scoring recruiting class in the history of the online recruiting services at their current pace? Is it possible that they got off to such a massive start and they're now recruiting at such a premium level nationally that in a way it's kind of helped Michigan a little bit? Because even though Michigan's gotten as many top 100 kids as Clemson has, there's a lot of 4-star guys here that are, between, 101 and 250 that Michigan has commitments for. And in a typical year, they'd be fighting off a team like Ohio State for a lot of those guys. But Ohio State is saying to guys like, say, Rayshon Benny, who hasn't committed to Michigan yet, but Michigan's in the thick of his recruitment, they're saying to a guy who is a top 100 overall prospect on the line, we may not have room for you. And in the past, I mean, James Franklin's done a nice job. He's a nice recruiter, but I think Jim Harbaugh's perfectly fine recruiting head-to-head against him or Brian Kelly. A lot of these are guys that in the past we'd have to beat Ohio State for, but this year we don't. Is that kind of helping in a strange way?
I think you might be onto something there. Harbaugh's recruiting prowess is pretty noted at this point. And in terms of OSU filling up their class pretty early, one glaring spot where it helped Michigan out is in the running back position. OSU picked up 2 really talented backs in Travion Henderson and then Pryor from North Carolina. And OSU is a very strong, legitimate contender and a threat to pick up a pledge from in-state West Bloomfield 4-star running back Donovan Edwards. So with having 2 running backs pick OSU pretty early, that virtually took the Buckeyes out of the race to land Edwards. So that's one byproduct where, OSU is outpacing the rest of the country at this point. They're recruiting at a torrid pace, but it gives Michigan a better chance to evaluate what guys they have a legitimate shot with.
I think it's also worth noting the success. Talk about the success Michigan's had on the East Coast. That's long been kind of Don Brown's stomping grounds. And when Jim Harbaugh came to Michigan, he made New Jersey a priority. And that's where Chris Partridge, who's now the new DC at Ole Miss, but he came from the high school ranks to be an assistant at Michigan because of the priority of that area. But even with Greg Schiano now at Rutgers, and they have a top 40 kind of class right now, which is very good for them. You have Mike Loxley, who knows the DMV well, and Maryland has a top 15 class right now. But despite how strong those native Eastern schools are recruiting, it's been a lot of that East Coast flavor that has really boosted this class for Michigan as well.
Yeah, there certainly is a high proportion of kids from the East Coast part of Michigan's 2021 class already. Don Brown that's his area. Everyone in that part of the country has a high degree of respect for him. He's built and established relationships at a lot of these schools like St. Sebastian's, where Lewis Hansen, Michigan's tight end commit, is from. And as those coaches have gotten to know Don Brown, they've seen what the players from the East Coast have done at Michigan. They feel comfortable sending their kids there for college as well. That brand name of Don Brown from his time coaching in Boston College, that really has gone a long ways in our Michigan's ability to land those top recruits from out there.
Of course, the linchpin in any class is what you did at the quarterback position. Michigan fans are well aware of the fact that this is going to be now with JT Daniels making it official that he's going to transfer to Georgia. There had been speculation that he was originally down to Michigan and USC, that maybe he might look at Michigan again, but no, he's going to head down south. That makes it official. This is going to be the first season under Harbaugh that Michigan's going to start the season with a quarterback that Harbaugh recruited from the high school ranks and developed himself. So, the quarterback position is the most important in the sport anyway, but it's really the linchpin to every elite recruiting class, and Michigan has their guy in 5-star J.J. McCarthy. What should our audience know about him?
Well, Wolverine fans should feel extremely confident in the caliber of player that J.J. McCarthy is. Now, not only can he make all the throws, he has good size. His leadership and his poise is a really strong quality that he possesses as well. At Nazareth Academy, where he was for the last 3 seasons, he recently transferred to IMG Academy for this fall. But in Illinois at Nazareth, he took his team to 3 straight state championships. So he's had experience playing in a high-pressure environment with a lot on the line. He galvanizes his teammates to really up their level of intensity. And you've seen him take that leadership role naturally as it pertains to the recruiting class as well. McCarthy's been probably the most vocal recruiter for the Wolverines on Twitter. And granted, it's only social media, so you can take that with a grain of salt. But he's talking to a lot of the top prospects that Michigan is interested in. He's staying in close communication with all the current commits in the group chat. And he's assumed the role of a leader before he even gets to college. And he's looking to do that early as an early enrollee. That's one of the benefits that he'll enjoy playing at IMG down in Florida as opposed to Nazareth Academy, where that wasn't really an option for him. So J.J. McCarthy, he has all the makings to be an impact player pretty early in his college career too, given the arm talent, and you pair that with his mental makeup. He looks like the real deal.
And you can tell he's a high school kid, so it makes sense, but he's still slight of build. That is something IMG Academy can help him with and get a head start on. That you're even a really good high school program, they're still going to be far more advanced there when it comes to strength and conditioning and body type and things of that nature. When we hired Ed Warner a couple of years ago before the 2018 season, Eric, and there was, you talked to Ohio State people about his time there, and they won the college football playoff while he was there, and everybody said, hey, this might be the best offensive line coach in the country, but the guy just doesn't want to recruit. We couldn't get him to recruit for us, and it was a big disappointment. This has the potential to this is going to be his 3rd recruiting class since he's been at Michigan. This has the potential to be the 3rd straight year that the offensive line is the strongest talent unit in a recruiting class since he arrived. So whatever he didn't want to do at Ohio State, maybe he thought, I don't have to recruit here, so I don't want to. I don't know. But the light has come on. And I mean, the talent that he is attracting, and this is another extraordinary offensive line class. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, you've seen a strong shift in the last couple seasons that coincides with his arrival at Michigan, like you said. But Ed Warner has been a force on the recruiting trail, especially in this current class of 2021. Now, his region, his area, he does a lot of recruiting in the state of Ohio since he coached there, and he has that name brand value. But you look at Raheem Anderson and Giovanni El-Hadi, they're from Michigan. Greg Crippen started out in Massachusetts. He now plays at IMG as a teammate of J.J. McCarthy. And then picking up Tristan Bounds, he's from Maryland but goes to a prep school in Connecticut. These players recognize that Michigan's putting out 4 NFL draft picks from the offensive line, like we saw in April. And a lot of those players are citing his influence and his vision for them as a strong reason why they picked Michigan.
If the offensive line won't be the most talented unit in this class, it's probably going to be linebacker. And when you put together what they brought in with this incoming class with Khalil Mullings, there's good word about Nakai Hill-Green that he may end up being one of the steals of this incoming recruiting class. And then the linebacker class that they have lined up for 2021, that's another area of strength there. Tell us about that unit.
Yeah, much like the offensive line is shaping up to be a real strength in this class, Michigan is loading up at linebackers. And what they've done is, while they've taken 4 or 5 linebackers, if you consider Keyshawn Bennett a true Viper, although it looks like he could move down to the weak side defensive end position when he gets to college. Either way, that's a lot of kids so far with only 17 commits, and there's balance to it too. Casey Finney, he was one of the earlier commits back at the end of March, I believe he pledged. And
yeah, that was the commitment that had our fans convinced this recruiting class was going to blow Chunk Watts. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Watching his tape, though, he looks like he shot out of a missile. His closing speed is really good for a player his size. He's already like 235, I believe, and he carries it well. He packs a punch and is a very physical player. And a lot of those same qualities could be used to describe Jaden Hood from St. Thomas Aquinas, too. Closing speed is definitely one of his strengths. And you watch his tape, he navigates through a sea of, whether it's his own defenders, defensive linemen, or blockers, he has the power to take on a lead blocker and keep going and make the play, finish the tackle. So those 2 players, they're going to be strong assets going forward, regardless of Casey Finney's ranking. It looks like he will see some time down the line, or he's a quality depth piece no matter what. And when you examine the outside linebacker position, Tyler McLaurin is a very athletic kid. He plays basketball at his school in Illinois, and his head coach, John Ivflo, he mentioned that you really could see Tyler McLaurin do a lot of things when he gets to Ann Arbor. At his high school team, he plays inside linebacker. That's where Ivflo likes him, but he recognized that it's projected he'll play on the outside at Michigan, kind of at that Sam position, maybe a little bit of a will. And you look over to Junior Colson, and he presents a very strong pass rushing threat. That's probably his largest or his greatest skill up to this point. Last year at his high school in Ravenwood, Tennessee, Colson picked up 175 tackles in only 13 games. So he's averaging about, 12 to 14 stops a game. He has his sights set on 200 tackles this year, and you pair that with his almost 20 sacks from a year ago, well over 20, I think it was 25 tackles for a loss. He's an extremely productive player in space. And honestly, the greatest comparison I could draw to Junior Colson, and this is why I'm so big on him, is he looks a lot like Jason Taylor, who played for the Miami Dolphins and I think the Redskins later on in his career. He's a tall guy. He moves really well. He's a pass rushing freak. And I believe Taylor was one of the first real hybrid outside linebacker defensive end guys. NFL.com listed him at 6'4", 245 pounds. Now, currently, Colson's 6'4" and 224. So over the course of his senior season, and once he gets into Michigan's strength and conditioning program, you could really see him bridge the gap in terms of weight between him and Taylor. And I think that they'll have a similar playing style on the field once he gets to college.
Who's the big sleeper so far? One of the things we've seen under Harbaugh is they actually do a great job identifying guys early before the services pick up on them and then see them soar up the rankings. I think of a guy like a Giles Jackson is a great example of that recently. You need to be far more concerned about what they do with the 5 stars they get. See Rashawn Gary, who was turned into basically a glorified anchor against the run game in his 3 years here. So that's why when I'm not so much concerned about the Casey Finneys or the TJ Guys of the world, who looks to me like a guy who's criminally underranked. I'm far more interested in what they do with the elite players they get. So who is the big sleeper so far that when they strap it on and they get to campus is going to be a guy that's going to leave a multi-year mark that's not being thought of right now? Is it somebody like a TJ Guy?
Well, I'm really glad you asked this question, Steve, because out of all the players that have committed so far, and you mentioned some guys like TJ Guy, who is underrated in my opinion, his ceiling far outweighs the 3-star assessment that he's been given so far. But I'm going to take it in a different direction and consider, probably outside of punter kicker Tommy Doman, this might be the least discussed player in Michigan's class, and that's Dominic Deace. He was a late March commitment as well. I think he committed the same day Greg Crippen did. I want to say that was March 25th. But if you watch him on film, he is a very quick guy off the edge. Now, he played strong side defensive end for Mater Dei High School in New Jersey last year, and that's one of the more prominent programs in the state. Mm-hmm. So he faced a high degree of competition, and even without playing the weak side pass rushing spot, he racked up 24 sacks last year, which led the entire state in New Jersey. Now, watching him on film, he obviously has a quick burst off the snap and at the line of scrimmage, but a player he really, really reminds me of from previous Michigan classes, he's now in the NFL, is Chase Winovich, because his speed and his ability to cause havoc in the backfield, to close the pocket, to rush the passer and put pressure on, that is something that jumps off the tape. And every time I watch Deace on film, I see the tenacious mentality that Chase showed at Jefferson High School too. And you look at Deace's coaches at Mater Dei that see him on a day in and day out basis. Defensive line coach Shannon Hoadley mentioned he just has a nonstop motor. He does not quit. He's relentless. And that's the type of description that you want to hear from your future defensive lineman. He has a lot of the qualities that should really shine.
All right. So let's look ahead. We talked about how impressive this class is already. And I put out a proposition of 6 players that I think right now, based on everything I've researched and that people like you have written, that I am comfortable saying at worst Michigan is in the top 2 for these players. Quentin Somerville, George Rooks, Donovan Edwards, Rocco Spindler, Rayshawn Benny, and Christian Dixon. Those 6 players. All right. Yeah. Number 1, do you think that that's realistic that Michigan at worst is in the top 2 for those 6 guys? Oh, and Drew Kendall. Drew Kendall. So there was 7. Those 7 guys.
Okay. Think that's a good addition. Maybe extend that to the top 3 for a player like Rocco, who, while he's very high on Michigan, he likes Penn State. He likes Notre Dame too, but that's just splitting hairs there. Michigan has done a very strong job with all of those guys. Dixon, for example, I would forecast him to end up in Michigan's class. We spoke 2 weeks ago, and he mentioned that he feels really comfortable with what they're doing in Ann Arbor. He likes it there. He enjoys the coaches. He talks to Jim Harbaugh on FaceTime pretty regularly, and they've been able to build a strong level. Even though he's out in California, he likes what's going on in Michigan, and the vibe I got from our conversation was that he knows it's a school he wants to go to. He'd like to take an official visit. Now, while the quarantine hurt us with, or it helped us with some kids that had seen Michigan, Dixon looks like he wants to wait until he can take some trips. Now, that would be similar to Rocco Spindler as well, but Michigan has done a great job recruiting him up to this point.
So it's you think it's realistic they could end though with those 7 guys? That's a realistic class?
Yeah.
Because if that's a realistic class, that would be, I believe, 7 top 100 players. Mm-hmm. And it's been many years since Michigan has landed that many top 100 overall guys. I mean, that would be, I think, the best class he's landed yet, and especially because I understand the class Rashawn Gary was in. I think it was number 4 in the country. They also signed 30 players in that class. They're not going to sign 30 players in this class, obviously. So when you look at the amount of players being signed, and one of them's going to be a kicker on top of that, in Tommy Dolan, I mean, I think this could be his best class, Eric.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Up to this point, it's extremely balanced. If you break it down on a position-by-position basis, we have at least one guy committed at every position, save, running back, fullback, and then defensive tackle. But we're in good shape at those spots as well. Donovan Edwards, in-state product, 4-star, number 2 back. That's a consensus. He's big on Michigan. His head coach, Ron Bellamy, went to Michigan as well. Michigan is in good shape he has a couple teammates that the Wolverines are recruiting as well. That's even going into the 2022 class. And just the vibe is very strong regarding those two. Edwards is a guy that I don't expect him to commit anytime soon. Coach Bellamy stressed how important him going on those official visits is. And this was back in March, right when the quarantine initially happened, when people weren't sure how long it would last. Now we know it's at least lasting to the end of July. So look in August or September for him to start taking some of these trips. But some schools that Michigan will have to fend off for his pledge include Oklahoma and Georgia. But I can tell you, after talking to people on the Georgia side of things, they are not optimistic about their ability to actually to actually land Edwards. So it looks like he's Michigan's to lose at this point.
Final thing for you, Eric. I mentioned also before you came on, we have almost 600 more players committed in this cycle than we did at this time last year. And I think there's a combination of things, even though you can't be taking visits and stuff now for going on a third month. I think we're dealing with young kids and they're bored. I think it's some of it, you know, they're just like, okay, I'm going to pull the trigger. But the other part is, once that first extra 100 started to commit, it has a domino effect, a trickle-down effect, because everybody else is like, well, dude, when they stop playing music, I want to make sure there's a chair for me to sit in, right? That I don't want all these spots filling up everywhere around the country. Could we see, when visits start back up again in August or later in the fall, could we see, just like we have a record number of early commitments, could we see a record number of decommitments? Could there be every team like a Michigan has 2 or 3 guys that, or I look at a player like Xavier Worthy, okay, arguably the top wide receiver in California this year, okay? And Michigan was in on him early, and now everybody is, and it's kind of Michigan with Oregon and some other schools. I could see that being a young man. Let's say he recruits to Oregon in a month because he can't get to Michigan. Michigan's not going to stop recruiting him, Eric, right? And I got to believe, like a Jaden Hood from St. Thomas Aquinas in Florida, I got to believe Miami's like, we're not going to stop recruiting that kid because he recruited to a school he's never been to, 2,000 miles away. So could we, as we get close to that December signing period, could we see some drama with a lot of last-minute decommitments and recommitments elsewhere because of how many kids committed without physically visiting a school?
You know, that's certainly possible, and it's an astute observation you make that it's something to watch out for. When you get 17 kids that commit before the middle part of June, there's certainly a chance that there is some attrition, and when kids start going back on visits again, it could happen. But just like that could hurt Michigan, and you could see some guys evaluate their options elsewhere, Michigan has the chance to steal some kids from other schools too. Now, at this point, I know they're really talking to Lorenzo Styles. He's a wide receiver currently committed to Notre Dame.
That's another top 100 overall player, yes.
Yes, yeah. And he wants to play both ways. That's a very important factor for him. And the Fighting Irish at the moment, they only see him on the offensive side of the ball. Now, as time progresses and he gets to evaluate his options more, if that's really a legitimate desire and one that will influence his collegiate decision, you could see the Fighting Irish slip in his mind. And when other schools, potentially Michigan down the road, offer him the option at least to try out at both sides of the ball, maybe he feels that's a better option for him down the line. So yes, there is a chance that attrition could occur away from Michigan, but it could benefit the Wolverines in the 2021 class as well.
Great stuff from Eric Rutter, our new edition reporter here at Wolverine Digest on the recruiting beat and what has been a very busy recruiting beat all over the country, but especially here with the Wolverines. Good to have you with us for the first time on Michigan Podcast. Great job, Eric. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You bet. We'll come back, and it's time for Twitter poll results and more next. Wolverine Digest is where you want to go each day to stay up to date on everything we think is going on with the Michigan Wolverines. And what we love about our site is it's an analysis and opinion-driven site. So we don't rely on access in order to get information. We rely on analysis, and it's all free at wolverinedigest.com. You can get all the great content we put up there for you each and every day at wolverinedigest.com. And it's the season premiere of the Twitter poll as well. We asked you, do you think this has the potential to be Harbaugh's best recruiting class yet? 65.5%, let's just round it up to 66%, shall we? 66% said yes, 34% said no. I mean, I'm not giving an opinion because the facts and the data say it does have the potential to be Jim Harbaugh's best recruiting class yet. So I would be in the yes category. Our first question of the week for the new season as well. This comes from Color Me Gone. I love that. Philip Gravel says, what are your thoughts for Michigan playing football this fall? And how do school president Mark Schlissel's recent comments and the fact that the state of Michigan has more restrictions than any other state affect your perspective? Well, for those of you that don't know, Mark Schlissel, Michigan school president, I believe has a background in, I think it's either virology or immunology, told the Wall Street Journal about a week ago that he still wasn't 100% sure that we were going to be able to play football in the fall. And if we didn't have students on campus, then we wouldn't play. This got defined all over the country as Michigan says it won't play football even if everybody else does. And so, I mean, at this point, I don't even know why anybody at the University of Michigan talks to any media outside of the state of Michigan, outside of the mitten. All right. Really, Schlissel's comments are not any different than what he's been saying all along, when early on, Mark Schlissel was considered an optimist, and Michigan was looking forward to bringing students back in the fall. I don't think it's any different at all, Philip. And I think a lot of it had to do with politics, frankly, because now the lockdown in Michigan has been lifted by Governor Whitmer earlier this week. But at the time that President Schlissel gave those comments, they had just extended the lockdown. And I think that politics played a part here. I think if he goes to the Wall Street Journal and says, hey, it looks great, we can't wait to get our players back on campus, but we can't because our governor's too cautious. I mean, that becomes a national story when the president of your state's most prestigious university throws your governor under the bus like that. Probably it's also not great for your funding proposal for the next fiscal year at the exact same time. So I think politics had a lot to play with that, and it's over 90% odds, over 90%. That the University of Michigan football season begins and ends relatively on time this fall. Well, that's going to do it for our season premiere episode. Always great to be back here with Michigan Podcast. We'll be back again at it next week as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's YouTube or iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. The more of those we get, the more it helps us to find more Michigan fans like you, and you can help even more so by telling all the Michigan fans you know about what we do here on Michigan Podcast as well. Until next time, go Blue.